Welcome to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner, a show about shifting our individual and collective beliefs on what is possible for the future of humanity. As our understanding of how our reality continues to shift, we are at a point of reunification between science and spirituality. What does the world look like when we break free from the generational trauma that has kept most humans playing small for thousands of years and step into our full power as the co-creators of this reality? I always ask that you keep an open mind with this podcast. Ask yourself what resonates with my truth at this time and what does not. Respect your intuition, but see if you can get through the whole show because there might be that little nugget buried deep in the conversation that unlocks something for you. Welcome back to Changing the Channel. I am joined today with Beth Egenhoefer. She is a design professor, sustainability researcher, strategy consultant, systems leader, and critical maker who uses design as a tool for social change. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, as am I. I was doing a little bit of kind of prep for the show and just getting excited about the conversation. This will be a very grounded conversation, which should be pretty enlightening. So tell us a little bit about your journey. How have you gotten into so many of these modalities, these focuses, and which one has you the most excited right now?
Yeah. Well, I think, what I gravitated towards with your podcast, Changing the Channel, is that idea of what do we need to change? And there's a lot of things in my path and in the work that I do that's about changing perspectives and changing the channel and changing how we think about things. How I arrived to where I am today, like so many others, and like some of your past guests and listening to past episodes, is I burned out. Right. And like so many career women today, just doing too much in too many places led my body to just give out. And the irony of it is a lot of my work was in sustainability and in
Hmm.
sustainable design. And so there was this element of irony of like, I'm working on sustainability and I can't even sustain myself. Right. Um, and I really, as much as I work in sustainable design, I have a book out about sustainable design. I use that word a lot. I actually really don't like the word sustainable because we're not living in a sustainable world, right? We are using more resources from the planet than we're putting back. We're using more labor than we're able to give. So we're not sustaining anything. And one of the things that I am looking to kind of change the channel on is shifting the conversation away from sustainability to regeneration. So, we're not sustaining anything. To sustain means like keep a constant level, and we're
Hmm.
not doing that, right? So we need to be regenerative right now in finding ways to have more energy, to restore, to renourish, to re-energize. And when I hit that place of personal burnout, I kind of realized, well, I need to start with myself. I can't um, help other people. I can't help in sustainability work or regenerative work if I myself am not there. Right. So it really comes from a place of what can I do to regenerate myself personally so that I can do work that regenerates my community, so that my community might be able to do work that regenerates our planet.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a little bit of where I got there. I have like a lot of other paths of just, being a designer, doing a lot of travel around the world, seeing how our stuff is made and seeing where it ends up in landfills after we're done with it. And that, really led me to wanting to work on sustainable design and regenerative design and changing our habits and practices and how we treat the planet.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people out there that would agree with you that sustainability it's a good buzzword and it got us to this point, but I think regeneration, there's a lot of movement in the regenerative farming and regenerative um, cultivation of land, which I think is a
Mhm.
huge benefit that's coming out. So yeah, I think you've got a beautiful message, and I think you've got a lot of people that are probably willing to kind of chip in and help out, making this regeneration a possibility. Finally, a place for listeners to gather and share. Join the Ascension Update Substack for messages and updates from our brothers and sisters helping with the ascension, articles on the future of humanity, and a Q&A where you can ask my guides anything you would like. This is the hub for everything ascension related. Click the link in the show notes or go to joegarner.substack.com to stay at the leading edge of this movement. And now, back to the show. So, you do a lot of work in systems thinking for sustainable behavioral change. Let's talk a little bit about that. What does that mean to you, and how is that showing up in the world?
Yeah. Well, I think, to use just like a really kind of brief example, or maybe an example that some people can grasp onto, is oftentimes we hear these solutions for how we can help the planet that are very kind of one-sided, right? So someone might say like, oh, well, let's just all eat organic food. If everybody eats organic food, then climate crisis solved, or then everything will be fine. But if we unpack that a little bit and say like, okay, well, how come not everyone can eat organic food, right? We can look at, well, where is it grown? Where is it sold? How much does it cost? What do you have to do to have an income where you can afford that? What kind of job do you have to have where you can shop at a store where you like easily and accessibly are going to get organic food? What kind of education did you have to get that? Where did you live to get that education, right? So you can easily kind of just really unpack that there's a lot of different systemic issues that all go into why somebody might be able to or not be able to eat organic food, for example, right? So then you're looking at things like, okay, it's not just about food, but it's about education. It's about racial justice, gender justice, where people live, how they're living, what they're valuing, why those things are, right? So then you're looking at the whole system, and you're not just looking at this one little thing. So oftentimes in design, I'm looking at how can you create a solution that's not just one-sided, or that doesn't have just one leverage point, but has multiple leverage points, right? So instead of just saying like, let's eat organic food, maybe we actually need to say, okay, well, let's look at where is there a food desert? And can we put a community garden in there that has a store that provides jobs and provides education? But also we need to be able to like value those things, right? So how do you change people's mindsets of, oh, I want to invest in my community. I want to invest in food, instead of, kind of leading a different lifestyle where maybe, you're just shopping at the corner store, getting potato chips and, Dr. Pepper or whatever it is. So then you're kind of getting into like, well, we need to change entire mindsets, entire paradigm. And that's really mind-boggling and much more difficult to do than simply saying, eat organic food, right? So that's kind of what like gets people sometimes.
Right. So then where do we go from there? Where, changing the hearts and minds of people is a very difficult endeavor for anybody to take on. So from a systemic approach, what does that kind of look like? And again, you don't have to have here's how to do it, but like what does it start to look like? Like what are the hypotheses of this systemic change that we're going through? And from my perspective, we're going to go through it whether we choose to or not. If we
Right.
choose to just ignore it, then there's going to be kind of a slap up the side of the head, like, hey, you guys need to change what you're doing because it's affecting every other aspect of the planet.
Yeah. I think about that a lot. So I'm also a professor in higher ed. And I think right now in higher ed, there's this parallel with what's happening in higher ed and what's happening in climate change. And that is that, for the past 10 years, people have been ringing the alarm bells saying, hey, there's this enrollment cliff coming. Hey, there's all this stuff on the horizon. If we look at, who's in elementary school, they're going to get to high school, they're going to get to college. Higher ed's got to change. And so many people in higher ed were like, no, 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 we're not going to change. We're too afraid to change. We're too afraid to change. Right. And I see all these universities kind of panicking
Hmm.
and, having to do sudden budget cuts and having to suddenly restructure. And people are like, oh no, it's so awful that, we're having to cut jobs and do these things. Right. And that's hard. because some of us are like, oh, well, we were warned about this. And oftentimes I look at it and I'm like, this is exactly like the climate crisis. Like we are, we've been warned, we're being warned. And people either are too afraid to change, they don't know how to change, they feel stuck in changing. And I think you're right that at some point we are going to need to change. Okay, but that wasn't your question. Your question was, how do we change the conversation? How do we change the hearts and minds of people? I think a lot of it is, like I said, needing to do things with these multiple leverage points, right? That it's not just a product or a thing, but it's something that also gets at how we talk about things, how we communicate with one another, how we relate to one another. There's a lot of interesting, frankly, food products out these days where I think Dave's Killer Bread is an interesting example to me. So Dave's Killer Bread is an organic bread company. I'm not a sponsor. They don't know who I am. I'm not getting paid to like promote their bread or anything like that, right? They're an organic bread company. They sell bread, right? You can buy their bread in a grocery store, right? But they employ people who used to be incarcerated. And so a lot of, and some people are never going to know that. They're going to buy the bread and they're never going to have any idea, right? And some people are going to buy the bread and they're going to read the package and be like, and some people might buy the bread, read the package, go to the website, see a little bit more. And then maybe their minds are changing a little bit about like, oh, formerly incarcerated people are human. They need a job. Like they can make bread. They can do way more than that too, right? But just that idea of like, oh, I can relate to someone in this way that maybe I couldn't relate to in a way before, right? There's something interesting too about the fact that they're making bread, which is just this very like basic, like let's break bread or let's eat bread together, right? So I think there's products like that do these kind of subtle things of trying to get at how we change the conversation. I think there's also the more these topics are inserted into conversation, the more they become normalized and the more people can be on board with them, right? I think, something I have seen, again, being an educator, I've seen in the past 10 years or so, just the acceptance of the LGBTQIA community and how many students are just so welcoming and just so out there about talking about sexuality, talking about gender spectrum in a way that didn't exist 10 years ago. And part of that is the fact that it's been inserted into Hollywood. It's been inserted into ads. It's been inserted into products that it starts to normalize things, right? So in this way, we also need to normalize how we treat the planet and how we treat each other. And the more that can be part of the conversation, that maybe people will connect a little bit more to be able to make some of those slower, more meaningful decisions.
Now, from your perspective, does the change come from a more top-down approach? So you have people who are, highly researched in these fields. Does it come from top down and then it filters down to the lower levels of the society, or does it need to be a bottom up approach and we need to really get into and start educating people at the bottom so that the change automatically happens? And how does that kind of work from a systemic standpoint?
I think it has to be both. So, and to kind of get to some of the themes of your show, is that there really has to be that interchange inside people to make the change themselves and to be able to see these things, to connect more with humanity, to connect more with the planet, and to really, truly understand that in order to make a change. That has to happen. And that's one of the things that I really like about kind of the theme of some of what you're talking about is how do you make inner change to affect outer change? Right. And people need to have that interchange in them to believe that we can operate on a different level with our planet and to interact in a different way with our planet, and need to really have that and believe that in order to move forward. At the same time, we need people at the top making those same leadership decisions. Now, I could be totally optimistic and say that, all those people at the top are also going to have that personal enlightenment and that's going to drive their decision. I don't think we're there yet.
It doesn't appear to be.
um, that tends to be much more of a capitalistic approach when you come top down. Um, but that's why I think it actually has to be both. That you need change from the top and you need change from the bottom. I think all too often we see people bend around the rules or get around the rules, and I think that's because we're not seeing systemic change and we're not seeing the like deep change that's needed, right? Again, if we want to use just like a really simplistic example that maybe people can like just grasp onto, and I realize I'm using a lot of really simple examples, but sometimes I like to use simple examples because then people can
Yeah.
maybe relate and go deeper on them, right? But California is one of the states that enacted a bag ban. So you cannot get a single-use plastic bag in our state. You have to instead either bring a reusable bag. If you forgot your bag, you can buy a reusable bag, right? So I use quote there is because these reusable bags, they're just thicker plastic.
Right.
So they look a lot like single-use plastic bags, but they're thicker, so therefore they can call them reusable, right? So because we didn't change our underlying behaviors, because we didn't change our underlying beliefs, we actually use more plastic now than we did before, right? You see this in California, New Jersey, New York, all these places that kind of said like, hey, no more bags. We have to use these alternatives. Well, we're using the alternatives in the same way, right? So the underlying systems didn't change. Our mindsets didn't change. Our beliefs didn't change. So it kind of backfired. But if you could really, truly connect to and understand where that plastic is coming from, where it's going, who it's harming, who it harmed when it was being produced, who it's going to harm when you get rid of it, then maybe you would have a different connection to it, right? Or if the people at the top made a different decision that wasn't, let's just, make a thicker plastic bag and call it reusable, but made a different decision that was guided from a different way, maybe we would have seen change in a different way, right? And there's a few states and a few places that are kind of looking at that, right? Like, okay, like just no bag at all. What are you going to do? You got to bring your own box and like, load it up and go, or, just like what it is, right? But that's something that I think is kind of interesting to think about is like, how do you just completely change the paradigm of like something
Right.
different, right? And so I think, again, it's like it takes that inner understanding of how we're connected to each other and the planet, but it also takes top-down decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely it's a mix of both. And I would say that it would take an understanding at the top that we're all connected, and that's going to bring a even better uh, a better way of making this transition. But again, how do you get to that top? How do you help people at the top transition? And there are people. I mean, there's executive coaches. There's people that are in the top of the executive food chain that are teaching people how to connect with their heart, that are teaching people how to tap into their intuition, that are teaching people how to really connect with you know, the higher aspects of themselves and understand the interconnectedness of all of us. And that I think is a step in the right direction. And there's ideas that this kind of debt financial system that we have is starting to crack and creak, and we'll kind of see where that leads, because that's a big part of it. I mean, we've built an entire economic machine that requires growth, that requires a decent amount of growth every single year, and a lot of people get kind of tied into that growth, and they think, oh well, it has to be our company that grows, like we have to grow 10% every year, and I don't think they realize that it's actually, if we continue this system, it's just the economic output has to grow. It doesn't necessarily have to be that Geico and Apple and Amazon have to grow 10% every year. They can stay stagnant as long as there's other businesses that are kind of coming into the fold, and we're continuing to kind of grow the economy and maybe move it towards, especially as this next generation, this generation that is a little bit more in touch with the interconnectedness of all of us, starts coming into the business world. I think you're going to see a lot of businesses opening up that are a little bit more heart led, that are, you know, definitely have a tinge towards sustainability, hopefully regeneration, which would be ideal. And then as those systems start to come through, you're going to see, especially with technology that is allowing the playing field to be a little bit more level. AI is doing this, again, all the information that these monster companies, especially the companies that were founded in the 50s and 60s and have been able to leverage and gain a majority of the market share, all the tools that they have used are now available to everybody else, all the little guys in the systems. So they'll be able to, if the hearts and minds change at the bottom of the pyramid, they'll be able to affect and basically garner a whole new, a gigantic portion of the market share, because they are sustainable, because they are doing 1% to the planet, because they are creating systems that seem in alignment with this reunification of consciousness on the planet.
Yeah. There is a lot in what you just said. I mean, I think, the idea that we just need to grow, 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 grow. It's like, okay, at some point, where's the limit?
Right.
Right. So I think that's, and that's a question that a lot of people are asking, like, where's the limit? Right. When do we go too far? Um, there are ways that technology is leveling the playing field. I would actually push back on that a little bit though. And I would say, okay, well, the people who are in another country manufacturing our Apple computers and our iPhones and our Apple Watches, is it accessible to them? Is it available to them?
Right.
Right. The people who are in the places where our waste is being shipped back to and our e-waste is being shipped back to, is it available to them? And I think that's, so much of this growth model is built on the idea of I'm going to grow at somebody else's expense, whether that be somebody else's labor or whether that be somebody else's, resources. If we're taking resources from the earth, if we're taking resources from the land, from different economies, labor physically, labor emotionally, so it's always at the expense of someone else or
something
another
else.
group or
Yeah.
something else, right?
Right.
So this idea that we're interconnected, yes, we're interconnected, but how do we also be interconnected in a way that is respectful for one another? And I think a lot of people, particularly those in the climate justice movement right now, you look at, okay, well, how do we invert this? How do we take the people who have been most harmed and give them power? Right? If the decisions were being made not by how much money do I get to make if I'm the guy at the top, but how do I make this product? How do I make this thing in a way that is safe for everyone, that is not going to be polluting the neighborhoods where the factory is, or not going to end up somewhere, or that the people making it will make a decent wage, or, have more power, have more say in the manufacturing process and the consumption process and the disposal process. So that's really, looking at like inverting power systems, but also, again, we're not just connected. Like, we can acknowledge we're all connected, but we also have to be able to respect one another and want good for one another and not kind of be so extractive in again, like physical resources, but also extractive in labor and psychological resources and emotional resources.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of talk of extending seats at the table to, all stakeholders, to everyone involved in the production process. And, do you see that going on? Do you see that happening right now? Are there companies that are really looking into this and kind of putting their money where their mouth is, or is this a lot of at this point kind of, not necessarily greenwashing, but it's a lot of in 30 years we'll be doing this kind of thing.
I think it's a lot of both. I think, one thing to really look at is just local economies and local principles and local practices. So much of our world is run by these big global corporations, right? And it's hard when each of our communities is different, right? Our neighborhoods are all different, our states are different, our countries are different. Um, and so what works in one community might not work in another community. So a lot of things, there is no one size fits all answer to sustainability, to regenerative practices, to how we're going to solve the climate crisis. There's no one answer, and we need like a million answers, right? It's an all hands on deck kind of thing. And I think that's the hard thing, is that people really want, like, give me the tool that's going to work. Like, whatever you worked, like, let me rinse and repeat where I am,
Mhm.
right? But it doesn't work that way, because every community is different. So I think there are a lot of small local initiatives where you see change starting to happen. There are local initiatives where you're seeing, indigenous peoples take back their land. There are local initiatives where you're seeing, people of color who live in a neighborhood that has been redlined, that has a lot of pollution in them, speaking up and making change about their particular neighborhood or their particular instance. So, it is happening at local levels. And so part of why I kind of question any kind of, big company making change is because, again, it's kind of dependent on like where in the community it is and what's sitting there. Certainly there are changes that are being made, right? Like we are, less and less companies are using styrofoam. Great. Right. But we're still consuming, right? So I think, I got to tour an Amazon facility recently, and they were just touting about, oh, all these great sustainability practices they have, and how all their packaging is using less material, and so it's lighter and it's just better. And the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, but your sales are way up, right? But we
Right.
buy more and more on Amazon, right? So yeah, maybe the box is better than it was 5 years ago, but we've now conditioned ourselves to be buying more and more online. So there's always kind of this like push and pull that's there.
Right, and that buying more online, it's just it's an artifact of this idea that we have to continue to grow and grow and grow. The only way, this was definitely prevalent in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was that, the best way out of any situation is to provide economic opportunity for that group of people. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, can you speak to that? Is that the way forward? Is economic opportunity the only way that we can get people out of, whether it's a depression, or their the level of consciousness, the level of feeling that they are at that very moment? Like,
Well, I certainly hope not. Right? I mean, I think, capitalism is built on this idea that money will buy you happiness, right? Or that we can buy our way out of this, right? I think,
right,
there's so much about just, everyone's burnt out right now and checked out right now. And so what do? You buy something to make you feel better. You buy a book on burnout. You buy, you know, chocolates, you buy a face mask, you buy new clothes, you buy something, like you buy your way out of it, right? And so a lot of, I think, your work about just having people be on a kind of personal journey, or a personal coming to personal growth and personal change, is like, again, you have to get to that place where I'm not going to buy happiness. I
mhm,
need I need to find that fulfillment not in something I'm going to purchase. Or if it is, it's a really meaningful purchase. It's not a kind of mindless mindless
right,
purchase, right? And I think in the same way that you see capitalism being built on this like buy more, sell more, sell more, sell more, more and more people, they're just, going through the world, in a fog of just on autopilot, on a treadmill, right? And so they're just consuming in that same way, and it's like, they're consuming and there's a big hole in the side of them because it's not filling them up, right?
Right.
And that's, obviously what capitalism wants you to do, because then you just buy more and you continue the cycle, right? So some of it is finding that place of, oh, I'm not going to be fulfilled by buying something else. I'm not going to be fulfilled by getting um, a certain promotion or by looking a certain way. And, sometimes you will, right? Like sometimes there are exceptions to that, right? Like if you like are
We're all
after a certain
human.
promotion, you're after a certain promotion that's going to like, really fulfill you, then like, great, and I've, had that in my life too. But I think there's also that way of kind of doing it, where again, you're just like on autopilot, consuming, and not really questioning like what is fulfilling you. And I think, that's going to be a big wake up call for people and for society when we look at like, okay, how can a business just say like, you know what, I don't need to double my profits this year. I just need to keep making enough.
Mhm.
Right. Or, and I get that that's super complicated, right? Because if cost of living is going up and your employees need more money to live, you got to make more money, right? But how do we balance those things, right? And how do we like rethink cost of living as more beyond just, affording things, which is really hard to do. I get it. Right now, inflation
Right.
is crazy, right? Our grocery bills are crazy. So to say to somebody like, oh, it's more than food, it's hard. I mean, to be like, yes, it is about like inner happiness and inner peace. And also I need to eat.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I've felt on my journey. I mean, it's just like, yeah, I don't wanna participate in that system anymore, but I also somehow have to eat and have a roof over my house and continue to meet, I'm no good um, y as a human being if my lowest level of needs are not met. If I'm, homeless because I'm not able to earn enough money to have a place where I can stay. But I think, looking at a systemic approach to that, it does seem like the fractional reserve banking system is almost the start of that growth at all costs mentality, because that's how it works. You have to have growth in this fractional reserve banking system in order for it to continue. It's similar to a Ponzi scheme. Like you just have to keep adding more levels to it, and it has to continue to grow. Otherwise, it falls apart. And the founders and the country, America, didn't have fractional reserve banking, didn't have a fiat currency for many years. They knew that was, this was a lesson that they had learned in Europe in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, was that, you know, this is not how you have a sustainable economic system. You can't have fractional reserve banking, and you shouldn't have a fiat currency, because the fiat currency, I mean, it's so easy just to get into a problem and say, all right, well, we'll just print more money and that'll solve the issue. But it doesn't solve the issue. It just kicks the can down the road. And then you have inflation. And then you have, now you're incentivizing businesses to continue to grow, to be able to keep up with the cost of inflation. And it causes all these issues and problems. But then how do we transition away from that? And, there are certainly technologies that exist that would allow us to do that. But then, do you forgive all debt? Is that the answer? Do you do what's called, Nasara or Jasara, which is, basically these debt forgiveness systems, either nationally or globally? And who gets to decide which debts are forgiven, which debts are not forgiven? Do the debts transfer over? It becomes a very, very, very complex question, and the answer to that lies in everyone coming to the table and saying, all right, well, let's figure this out. But that's a very complicated, how do you have a conversation with 100 million people? How is that the next technology that we need to build, is a way for us to vote and communicate um on a global scale? And is there a non-physical technology like telepathy that would allow us to become this species that is able to solve problems on a species-wide basis?
Wow. That's a lot of really big questions, some of which I've never considered before. Um, you're never going to be able to have the whole planet vote, right? Like we can't even have like everyone in our country vote when like and like believe the results of the election, right?
Right.
So there has to be a sense of trust that's enabled, right? I think, so much of the polarization you see today is just simply because people don't trust one another.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of that comes from kind of othering people, right? So the same way that we exploit people to make money, we then other them, right? So if we other people, then we're kind of saying they're less than, or, you can kind of do some of this fear mongering that like you need to fear this thing. So some of it just has to do with um, trust and building trust in humanity and building trust in one another. I think another thing just to think about, which is a really hard thing, and I have way more questions than I do answers for this kind of thing. But if you think about how we've gotten to this moment in time, it's been years, 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 decades in the making. And we've sped up time so much that like everyone's looking for a solution that will happen now. What can we do now to fix this now? And we're not going to be able to, right? We're not going to be able to fix it overnight. It took decades of different decisions, different laws, different ways of educating people, of othering people, of, instilling these beliefs in one another to get here. It's going to take time to undo all of that, right? If you think about, how long it takes a tree to grow, right? You plant the seed, it takes a really long time for that tree to grow, and it takes, a day to chop it down. And we got to regrow, and we have to regrow a lot of those trees. So it's going to take time. It's not something that can happen quickly. And of course, the sad thing is we need it to happen quickly because, we see all of the destruction that's happening in the world today. Um, I guess I would just point to things like transition design. Transition design is a field that basically looks for how do we see everything? How do we see everything that's connected? And how can we take different pinpoints and enact them to move forward? So almost as if you think about having acupuncture done. If you've ever had acupuncture done, right? You could go and say, oh, I have this, thing happening in my neck, and the acupuncturist is going to put needles, sure, in your neck, but also, in your head and your arm and your leg and your foot and all over your body, and all of those points in your body working together to create a flow
Right.
to help what's in your neck, right? And that's what has to happen right now in our societies is we have to have all of these multiple leverage points happening so that a bigger change can happen. And so again, it's not about just one thing, it's about a lot of different things and a lot of different things happening, and all of those have to be kind of rooted in this mentality of belonging and trusting and not wanting to take advantage of other people and not like needing to exploit others or other resources or other things so that I can have more.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes I like to reframe it as not needing to exploit, but just turning a blind eye to the exploitation that exists within that system. Because I think for the most part, most people aren't actively going out to see how they can exploit other human beings, but they benefit in a very, very measurable way from the exploitation, and they just choose not to see where they're
Yeah,
exploiting, see where they're possibly putting somebody down for their own personal gain.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah, and that, again, it all goes back to the realization that we're all in this together, that it isn't us versus them at any stratum of society, that it is all the same. And I don't know, there's just a whole generation of people who have been brought up and basically they exist in a reality where it is an us versus them. It was us versus Russia. It was or the USSR. It's us versus China. It's India versus South Africa. We're all in this kind of mindset where it's us versus them. And the whole idea of the show is that we're moving towards this unification, this reunification of humanity. And again, the time frame, I don't know. It's up to each individual what that time frame looks like. But I'm hoping within a decade or so, we get to a point where it's not necessarily like, okay, we're all the same thing. We're all the same energy experiencing itself from different perspectives. Like that would be wonderful, but that's probably not going to happen. But I think we're going to get to a point where people do realize, okay, everything that I do has an impact on other people. So how can I be okay with the impact that I'm having on other people and understand that yes, there will be some impact that's going to harm other people, or maybe it seems unjust that I have this ability or this ability to go shop organic foods and somebody else doesn't. But every week I take 10% of my paycheck and I give it to a foundation that's helping these people. Or again, from my perspective, money is just energy. Money is just energy flowing. And there seems to be this belief that you have to store all the energy. And something that I was thinking about the other day was um there's this idea in financials called FIRE. It's financial independence, retire early. And it's basically you take as much of your paycheck and you invest it into a mutual fund or basically a fund that tracks the major either the Dow or the FTSE or NASDAQ. And you just keep putting that in. And what that's basically doing is it is taking the benefit of these massive corporations, the US economy, it's taking that benefit and it's bringing it back to all these other people within the system. So, I'm racking my brain on how do we create a system that allows the benefit of the entire economy to go back to all of the people instead of just a small amount of people. And obviously you still have to benefit the people that are taking the risks, that are risking their own capital to do that. But at some point if you make 50%, then maybe the rest of it does happen to go back to the rest of the population, whether that's through the stock exchange or it's through taxation or it's through a little bit of both. And then as we've seen over the last couple of years, the more that you compile money, so the US government takes the most money in, they take taxes from everybody, piles it into this big, this gigantic pool of money. And then we all have to kind of figure out how to spend that pool of money. And there seems to be a whole lot of foul play when you start to amass trillions of dollars and electing roughly 700 people to decide what and where that money is spent. So, from a system approach, that system doesn't seem to be working, and that's a pretty big system to take on. I think there's these kind of decentralized systems that the technology exists, whether or not we're able to put the information into that technology and allow the trust that this technology is going to do what it needs to do. And talking about blockchain, that seems to be one of the ways that we could decentralize this very centralized power that has amassed within our system. But again, you got to get people to trust that, okay, well, this is a blockchain system. If anybody does mess or change the code or has any change in this system, that it will alert us and we'll be able to tell. There'll be, I would assume people that are basically their job is to make sure that the system isn't changing without anybody else noticing, raising flags, and then we decide, okay, what happens now that the system was changed, who changed it, and how do we fix it. That seems to kind of make sense, kind of moving into the future. But again, there's a lot that can be said about bringing a hypothesis into a practical situation. So I don't know if you've thought of anything kind of that high level, but would love to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Wow. Well, I am not a financial person. I don't, uh, sometimes um, I think the reverse. I think the opposite, like the almost the opposite direction of where you're thinking, which is, I can't control where my taxes go. Sure, I can vote. I can control it in that way, right? But I don't have direct control over it. So what do I have direct control over? What can I directly control, right?
Hmm.
I think about there's a group of people in my neighborhood who get together every Sunday morning and we walk around the neighborhood together and we pick up trash. And we part of the goal, of course, is to clean up the neighborhood and treat our neighborhood as if it's our front yard because it is, right? But part of the goal is also to build community with one another and just to get to know other people and to see our neighbors and get to know our neighbors and get to know the people in our community. And, one time I was out with them recently and we are out picking up trash and these other people walked past us and I overheard this comment by this man who was just like, "Oh, that's really nice what they're doing, but it's such a futile attempt." And
Hmm.
I just thought to myself, you don't get it. Like, yeah, you're right that we're going to pick up trash and tomorrow someone else is going to litter and there's going to be more trash here. And from that perspective, it is futile, right? Like, I live in a major city. There's always going to be trash. Yes, it is, right? But, they weren't seeing that it was actually about something much bigger than that. It was about taking care of the environment and taking care of people in the community and about getting to know and build community. Um, and so, I think about like that is just, it's not about finances in the way that you're talking about finances. It's not about, elected officials in government and kind of these really huge systems. It's about something that's very, very small and very, very close to like one, not even city, one neighborhood within a city, right? But it's just such a small way that is something I can control.
Hmm.
And that is a way that I can build community and that community does spread to other neighbors, to other people who see us, to other people we interact with, right? So it's almost like the total opposite end of the spectrum of what you are bringing up. But to me, I look for like, what are the ways that we can, like, what can we control and what can we have? Because I think those are the things that are going to make people hopeful. Like if I can do an action and I can see it change, I can see it have an impact, then that's going to give me more hope than giving my money to a big foundation or to, my taxes or voting or, my elected officials, passing some law that I want to see. You don't always see or feel those effects in the same way. And I think if we're talking about like connecting with humans and connecting with humanity, it's more about those small connections. And, the hope would be again that there's that ripple on that those kinds of people, those kinds of connections are going upward.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, you're definitely changing my perspective as far as what needs to be done. Because, yeah, I mean, it really does. It starts with the individual. Like it always, always, always starts with the individual, and that's kind of where we are right now in this weird transition from, um, this very individualized society. That basically each human is here for our own, but realizing that we're all in this together, that we're all part of what we call this super organism called humanity. And we've had these super organisms like the US, like China, that are we're seeing what the limits of their abilities are to have a positive effect on the rest of the humans within that system. And yeah, now we need to kind of take our power back. And this is kind of that libertarian kind of jargon that goes around. It's like we need individualized power. We each need to make decisions for ourselves and be able to make our own or make our own way in the world. And this is, I think, kind of where you're coming around to. It's like we should not be putting our faith in anything above anything that we don't have control over, and just really start to take control back of how we are showing up in the world, how we are being every single day. And in that, we're changing, you know, essentially from the bottom up, what what is happening on the planet? What is the perspective of us as a species?
Yeah. I I would agree with some of what you're saying. I think it's a yes and. Like, yes, it does start with self, but we also need to live in community with one another. So it's
Right.
not, we can't all just we can't have we can't have a community where everyone only thinks about themselves and cares about themselves, right? We also do have to have opportunities to put others first and to work together. There's a really simple example that David Orr likes to use sometimes in talking about our complexities. And if you think about a simple pencil, like a simple number two pencil, um, it's a pretty simple device, but one person can't make it. There's not one person who knows, or, maybe there is, right? But the idea is like a number two pencil has wood, it has lead, it has metal, it has rubber, it has plastic in the paint that's on it, it has ink on it, it has all these different materials. If you think about how many different people worked on extracting all of those materials and then putting them together to make something as simple as a pencil, right? And so if you would ask one person, like, can you one individual make a pencil? Like, probably not, right?
Mm-mm.
It takes it takes a lot of people to make a simple pencil. It takes a lot of people to make our clothes, to make our food, to make our infrastructure. We have to be able to work and live in community. So it's not just about an individual self. It is about working with others, but I think it's about seeing the humanity in one another and connecting with people in that way.
Yeah, and that's what kind of Ken Wilber talks about a lot, is that we're holons. It's that we're individuals, and we're also a part of a greater thing. Just like our body is made up of cells, and each individual cell has their own kind of autonomy, but they also work together to create the organs inside of us. Those organs work together to create a functioning system, and that functioning system is what we call the human body. And then there's a conscious element to the human, and that's kind of where we are in humanity. We're figuring out how to play with each other to create a much larger being, a super organism, but not lose touch with our individuality as well. I think that's kind of a good way to conceptualize what is happening on
Mhm.
humanity. It's not that we need total individualism, and that's not what I was saying. Like,
Right,
I
right.
don't necessarily
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
agree with um, total individualistic perspective. We need to be
Right.
individuals that are in control of our lives, that also realize that our actions affect those closest to us, our family, our friends, our community, that our community affects the larger community, county or state, and then that state affects the larger organism, bless you,
Excuse me. Thank you.
the country, and then that country affects the larger organism, which is the global society, the fact that we live in this global society. So you almost have to balance those two perspectives. You have to balance that, hey, I need to do what's good for me and what's good for my family and what's good for my community, but it also has to be good for the entirety of the planet, and that's the only way that we make it out of this. And Jordan Peterson talks a lot about that, is envisioning your life not just today, but tomorrow into the future, that it is good for not just you, not just your family, not just your community, but it's good for the entirety of the world. And that's how you kind of design your ideal life. That's how you live. He uses the term God. That's how you live within the realm of God. I think that can kind of be extrapolated out to, that's how we live as functioning humans in a society, especially as we continue to globalize and realize that we are way bigger than just this small little community that we were used to, and that we spent 10,000 years growing up in these communities of 150 or less. And now all of a sudden, within 500 years, we've got these massive communities of people that have to exist all together, all with these limited resources. So it's a fascinating time to be alive, and I think just having these conversations puts out this understanding that, hey, we actually do have to kind of start thinking about this, and the more people that are thinking about it, I think the better the outcome is going to be. If we continue to kind of stuff things under the rug and say, hey, we don't have to think about this yet, like that's somebody else's problem to deal with, and we're gonna, like I said, there's gonna be a reckoning that comes, whether that is economic, financial, some type of global catastrophe, or multiple global catastrophes when the planet can't keep up with our consumption. These are all things that I am putting my mental capacity into. How do we not go down that road, and how do we steer the ship away from those icebergs? But again, it's not just one person that's commanding this ship. There's a whole lot of people that are commanding the ship. So it takes that individual to change their perspective and be open to change, because that's
Right.
the only way it's going to happen. We can't solve all of these problems with the lens of 1990 science. Like it's going to take the evolution of science, the evolution of technology, the evolution of society to solve all of these big issues. And what brings me hope is that there's never been as many highly intelligent humans on the planet as ever before. Everybody is far more educated than anyone has ever been. The internet is democratizing access to information. So, all the information isn't stored in the intelligences of the higher education system or the church system as it's been in past. And I think the higher education system is realizing this. It's like, hey, we've built this system that worked 50 or 100 or 150 years ago, but it's not working in today's world with the internet. So how are we going to transition? And if they don't transition, that's just another system that I think is going to have a massive reckoning. And the ones that are getting out in front of it, the ones that are embracing technology and the ubiquitousness of information and being able to share it quickly and as quickly and as democratically as possible, not just pockets of information, but information available to everyone. Again, that seems like the way forward for me.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, there's going to be a big change. There's going to be a reckoning. And if we can get to that place from a place of love and compassion and wanting to change, it's going to be far better than having to hit that point out of fear or, um, you know, anger. And so I think, your question of, like what gives you hope? Like sometimes I say like, well, what's the other choice? Right? If I'm not hopeful, then I'm pessimistic.
Mhm.
And I don't say that with like, a total blind eye. Like obviously, we do need to design for adaptation because there are things that, we're not going to go back for. So it's not a total like, Pollyanna moment or anything like that. But I think overall, if we can be hopeful and lead from a place of hope instead of a place of fear and anger, I think we'll be far better off together.
Yeah, and that's the idea behind. There's an esoteric idea behind basically what quantum mechanics is starting to kind of figure out, is that your individual consciousness is experiencing different realities, it's shifting different realities every multiple times per second, and based on your vibration, each individual vibration, you're going to experience a reality that matches that vibration. So if you're hopeful, if you're loving, if you're joyful, your reality, the reality that you're going to experience, is going to be loving and joyful. And again, some of us are going to make this transition on that love, joy, hope, and some of us are going to make that transition on the pain, fear, suffering. And you get to choose. Each person gets to choose how they experience this quantum reality game that we're all playing, however you want to kind of conceptualize that. So again, the message for me always, it's at the start of the show, it's at the end of the show. The only change you need to do is on yourself. If you have hope, if you have excitement, if you have joy, and if you have love in your being and you're vibrating at that frequency, that's the reality that you're going to experience. It's very difficult. Again, you talk about changing your mentality. It's very difficult for conscious beings who have never experienced this like quantum shifting in reality, who have always thought that there's one reality. This is the only reality that I'm experiencing, and everyone else is experiencing the same reality. To go from that to this new understanding where we're all experiencing reality from different perspectives, from different ways, from different vibrations. And now we're at this point in human history where we're realizing that each one of those vibrations is coming into this more unified consciousness, this more unified perspective. And there is an opportunity, if you're vibrating at the right level, to come into not necessarily a utopia, but a reality where everybody is living from joy, from love, from peace. And that's where we're moving towards. And it might not feel like it right now. But you have a choice. Each human has a choice to decide which reality they want to experience. Do they want to go down that road of learning their lessons from pain and suffering, or do they want to go down the road of learning the lessons from intuition and from trust in a power that is above them? And that's kind of that's my
Yeah.
spiel.
Change the channel.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation, and I hope that, for those who are listening, I hope maybe there's some nugget in here that helps them kind of think about things in a different way, or think about how we connect with humanity in a different way, and kind of come to that place of hope in trying to move us forward.
I hope so as well. And that's the whole reason I'm doing this show, is to try to help people maybe just see from a little bit different perspective. Again, it's your choice. I'm not forcing any views, perspectives, anything on. I like to play mind games, and that's what I do, with guests. It's like, what if we go down the route of let's take full total control and do that? But that doesn't mean that that's what I want. Like I am 100% in. I trust that everybody's going to make the decision that they need to make, and that it's going to work out for everybody exactly as it needs to work out. So that's how I operate. And I just like to have fun and see where guests are and what they think, and just have a good time with it. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Rachel.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. I will make sure that I link all of your socials, website, all that in the show notes, so that people can find you if they're looking for any information on systems thinking, sustainable behavior change, anything along those lines. Any other last parting words for everybody?
Oh boy, last parting words. I would just say to change the channel, to find how you can regenerate yourself, to regenerate your community, to regenerate the planet.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again, Rachel, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the podcast, hit the bell to know when a new show comes out, share with a friend, and rate us on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It helps get these messages out to more people to create the collective shift in reality we are here to experience. Make sure you interact with the Q&A and poll sections of the show so I can continue to provide content you enjoy. Finally, check out my website in the show notes to become a VIP of Changing the Channel and join the shift that is happening.